Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Cherie Burton. How are you? This is episode 120, Conscious Feminine Sexuality. Now, whether you're male or female, you'll definitely be served by this episode. The big question is, do you actually feel healthy and whole as a sexual being? For many women, there could be a libido shutdown, and she doesn't know why. But oftentimes, as with everything it manifests physically, there's an emotional, spiritual root that is trying to get our attention. So my friend Melisa Keenan, she actually was a guest on a former episode I did. Wow, I guess it was well over a year ago. She's like, can I come back and talk a little bit more about what I've learned? She's amazing in her reach with feminine intimacy. She does feminine intimacy coaching. She's a speaker. She basically is this trailblazer that is trying to get women to pursue the fullest experience of life by embodying intimacy, leading with their feminine. So that could be in business, marriage, whatever setting, right? So she does have 4 children. But she also has this other piece of her that she's just stepped into so intuitively and beautifully around the space of, hey, ladies, wake up. You are a sexual being, and there's a reason that this power is manifesting, and it's more than just a connection to a partner. That's a huge part of it. But as I've reiterated in past episodes, your sexuality is for you, and she is definitely aligned with that as well. So let's listen in on how we can be more conscious about the sexual force and sexual current within us and manage it and utilize it and let it flow for us in creative and expansive ways to become more conscious overall in every aspect of our lives without the yucky shame. Head over to Facebook and ask to join my Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group. It's a private group for listeners of this podcast. And also on Instagram, cherie.burton, which is all things related to this podcast as well, and diving a little bit deeper into our lived experience, not just heady topics and esoteric stuff, but actual embodiment of these beautiful principles. Well, Melisa, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. So grateful, Cherie, for you and what you do in the world.
Well, thank you. Likewise. I mean, gosh, I just stand back and just kind of watch you go from the time I first met you into how you've grown your family. You've obviously expanded your consciousness, but also you've really grown in the space of business with really filling a need in the marketplace, I should say. And that is, women in intimacy and connecting them to themselves. We talked about this in our episode, whenever it was, it was like over a year ago, I know, about into me, see, like into me, I see, which I've been teaching for years in my workshops, but I don't think I really got it. So we're going to land this into really practical and, I guess, identifiable constructs for people so that they can feel like, oh, I don't have to be in shame about this. And as we talk about masculine, feminine, and all of this, the stuff surrounding like owning your feminine energy, it can be a process of joy and discovery rather than, is this okay? And like all that, exactly. All the shame stuff around that, all the old stuff. So let's start with kind of distinguishing. I talk a lot in this podcast about feminine energy and the masculine and feminine dynamics. And every teacher I talk to has a different slant or a different take on it. So let's start there. Let's just kind of talk about what you've seen culturally with the masculine and feminine roles, whether it's helpful or hurtful.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that in because I think if we don't distinguish the difference between cultural and energetic, masculine and feminine, we get a lot of confusion. So women will reach out to me. I'm really a stand for feminine energy and owning and expanding our feminine container in the world. So women will reach out to me and they'll say things like, I just wish I was more feminine. And I'm like, tell me more. What do you mean? And they'll say, I see these women with their nails painted and, and they get their hair done on a regular basis. And I just have to kind of giggle because there's so much more depth to what it means to be in our feminine energy. It may or may not have anything to do with some of these more, I think, surface level things.
Yeah,
right?
like the fluff, the
Yes.
the polish, literally,
And there's nothing, my own feminine energy might call me to beautify the details around me, which may call me to get my hair done and paint my nails, or it may call me to something completely different.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I used to do, well, I'm a former Mrs. Utah, but I stepped into pageant coaching after that for 8 years. And so it was always this hang up with, and I didn't really understand feminine energy back then. I didn't categorize it that way, but I knew there was this essence that needed to flow from the woman to the judges and audience to connect into who she is. We did spend a lot of energy finding, the right clothing, cut, style, what have you, the way she carries herself. But ultimately, they call it the it factor. But what I've come to realize the it factor is a woman who's merged her soul with her body, at least for that time, where she's really in her body. She could have the most drab gown, honestly.
Yep.
But it was that magnetic, that feminine magnetism that would draw in because she was authentically herself, letting her own essence flow through her.
I love that so much. I had a client just last week who her husband is in the military and he's gone, I think 4 months at a time. He's really only home 2 months out of every year. It's very strenuous and hard on them, and they have 4 kids. And she was talking about this same idea, really letting go or separating out, parsing out these pieces between cultural femininity and feminine energy. And she was like, for the first time ever, I realized that even though they have a farm. She's like, I do all these, quote unquote, culturally masculine jobs. She's shoveling their corrals. She's, feeding the animals. She's doing all these. And then plus she has to be, kind of the father, the disciplinarian, whatever in her home when he's not there. So she's like, I'm doing all these culturally masculine things. But does that mean that I cannot experience my true feminine essence while doing them? And it was a beautiful moment to be like, can you be out, shoveling shit and literally and still be radiant in feminine energy? The answer is 100% yes.
Well, yeah, and that was all of our ancestors, right? They all had to do that just to survive. And that's sexy. Come on. There's but, and you and I both know it isn't about sexuality necessarily as much as it is, I feel like a lot of it has to do with that first and second chakra, the root chakra of being rooted here. I have a right to be here now, which you would think most of us would be resonating with that. But most of us are really scared. We're scared and we don't feel safe. And certainly not necessarily in a lot of our relationships, we don't feel that safety, but also we don't feel safe in relationship to what needs to come out of our soul through our body. That sometimes is scary and unsafe. And then the second chakra being all about, which is just above that, it's just right in the womb area. And it's all about creation and sacred sexuality and wisdom. So, when you're talking about the cultural feminine and the energy-based or energetic feminine in each woman, for you, what did you notice? What did you have to bust out of? I have my own journey with it. But how did you differentiate between those two states to do the work that you're doing?
Yeah, you know what? I want to actually give a little tool right here. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, yeah, that is a good point. What is the difference between cultural versus energetic feminine for me? And this tool that I give my clients as well is I ask them to think about what has been handed down to them through generations about what it means to be a good woman. That is how you identify the conditioning you receive for cultural femininity. What is it? You know, and that's for good or ill, right?
Yeah.
But we all have these messages where for me, it was my mother had a sign in our kitchen and it said, Wonder Woman works here. And she felt so much pride at literally being it all and doing it all, until she crashed. And then I didn't have a relationship with my mom from age 12 till I graduated high school. Like I didn't even live in the same home as her. So she burnt herself out trying to be Wonder Woman. That's what I saw. She was a nurse. She always had this shiny white outfit on. So I take some of these pieces and I go, okay, then what did I learn from her about what it means to be a good woman? It means you have to break your back. It means you have to be able to do everything.
For everyone else but yourself.
Yes. And she really did. It was amazing until I was 6 years old. I remember watching her early in the morning. She'd go for a walk, then she'd go to work, and then she'd come home. There was always a warm dinner, and my dad was running his business. And I mean, it was like, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how they juggled all that they did. It was really amazing, but it wasn't sustainable. So I learned that from my mother. So we take some of these pieces, do a little journaling, take some of these pieces and parse that out. And then what you get to do, I also learned that working hard was a principle that she really embodied. Being emotional was another principle that she embodied. So now you can look at those cultural pieces and ask yourself, okay, now I am my own woman and I get to decide what's in alignment for me about what it means for me to be a quote unquote good woman.
Exactly. And that's the delineation right there.
Yeah.
It's self-defined.
Exactly. And we have to. And until we do that, we are neglecting ourselves.
Sure. And to our mother's credit, I have an amazing mother who would regularly get burned out. She had a lot of children and many responsibilities and, just beautiful and talented and so affirming for us. And, but I could see how there was a perpetuated sort of, subtly and often not so subtly, this perpetuated idea that if a mother sacrifices really her all for her family, that's like spiritual and noble. Like it's kind of that old mother martyr syndrome.
Yeah, right.
Which has some merit. Let's be honest. I mean, we have to sacrifice as mothers. You have children. I have children. We know this. On a core level, we're going to do it anyway. It's in us, right? I think that as I look at my mother and my grandmothers and my mother-in-law and all these, they, bless their hearts, it just wasn't in the consciousness of their time to even remotely consider like a focused devotional self-care. And not that there weren't women that were doing that, but there weren't words for it. There were a lot of, encouraged spiritual practices like, prayer and those kind of things. And, scripture study of truth and those things, which obviously are huge pieces of alignment and grounding. But irrespective of like asking for stuff through prayer or being, on a spiritual path that way, of, I would say, accountability or a checklist, it's more like what feeds me. Like here's the general guidelines, but what lights me up? What makes me come alive? And I think that is where the cultural versus as you say, the cultural and the energy breaks. It's like I can take these cultural guidelines and put them in a sacred place because I honor that they're there for a reason, and I don't need to reinvent the wheel with a lot of them. However, I got to be me. I have to do what lights me up. How did you come to that?
Well, I think that, I didn't realize that I was doing it until hindsight, because what came to me was just a realization that I was miserable. And honestly, like, it was a rock bottom moment. My husband and I were separated. This was in 2013. Separated, 3 young kids at home, all in diapers. My youngest was 2 months old. And, our marriage was dangling from a thread, and my way of being was so miserable to me. And I wanted to blame my husband. He definitely had his own, like, things that he brought into the relationship, but so did I. And a huge aspect of it was not owning who I really am, not declaring who I really am, or even seeking that out, like you said. And so there was one moment for me where I actually went into my bathroom. I had put all my kids to sleep and went into my bathroom, and I had hair. My hair was almost down to my belly button, and I chopped it all off with scissors myself.
Wow, that's something out of a Hollywood movie, and that's
yeah, it was my Britney Spears moment. So it was very cathartic. I was sobbing, and I said to myself, like, I don't have the answers anymore, and I'm not going to continue to try to do it the way that I've been doing it. And it was a great surrender. And it felt like in that moment, God just said to me, good, now I can show you who you really are. Like, and I'm thinking this is my, my worst moment. And really it was like my birthplace moment. So, especially when we talk about marriage, we can take this cultural femininity a step further and ask, what have I been taught, through media, through my upbringing, through my religion, through any of these different things combined that come together about what it means to be a good wife. That was really eating at me. Even if we want to just look at what it means to be good, like a good wife when it comes to sex, there's so much wrapped up in that, right?
Yeah. And I mean, what is good, right? Like, that's a word that is, so multi-layered with so much judgment often, and misunderstanding around ideals. I think it all comes back to love, and we could have a whole conversation. I mean, that is the bridge, right, between the cultural and the energetic, is just stepping into love, whether it's self-love, coming into a space of acceptance for what's going on for you, where you're at, what your body looks like. I just have to read this quote right now, because I got this card from my dear sister, Tanya. She's so sweet. That's her love language. She'll just mail me like love notes. She does that for a lot of people, but this is a quote by Holly Holden Love. And then one day she simply stopped waiting to get there, or be more, or work it all out. And she laid down on the grass and drank in the beauty of the messy wonder that was her life. So for me, I just feel like this is where I'm at in my life. And I think my sister gets it, because she's only a year older than I am. And we're just at that season where it's like, you know what, everything's going to be okay. Why are we in so many fear programs around things not being okay, right? So you just lay down on the grass and you drink in the messiness and the beauty, right? Because it is what it is.
And that is such a perfect depiction of the feminine energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that being instead of doing, or a softening instead of needing to be frantic or rush around or be harsh. it's feeling or going inward as opposed to looking outward for our answers.
Yeah. Of course, we need that balance, right, between action and
right,
contemplation, if you will, or the inner outer balance. So let's go back a little bit to the cultural versus the energetic.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as you're working with clients? As I've worked with clients, I've seen some interesting things, but I'm very curious what you've seen, because you play specifically in the space of, helping women to become embodied, embracing their sensuality, embracing their sexuality, and healing themselves so they can be in a healthy relationship. So you're really in this embodiment piece, which is beautiful. Mm-hmm. What have you seen with your clients who can't differentiate between like the cultural and the energetic? Like what's happening culturally that would keep them chained there?
Let's go to sex, because it's an easy, tangible way to see some of these things at play, right?
Right.
She believes that, okay, and this is gonna it's so funny because this triggers people like crazy, but yet it still exists highly prevalently. She believes that it's her duty as a wife to have sex even if she doesn't want to. That's one big one culturally. Also, she believes that culturally she's supposed to want it, right? And if she doesn't, then there's another program. Something's wrong with me because I'm supposed to want it, especially with my husband. But she's not supposed to be too sexual. So then you meet these women who they have the higher sex drive than their husband. And then, oh man, that conditioning got them all riddled up. Like something's wrong with me because I want it more than him, and why doesn't he want me, and all these things. Because then we go into cultural masculinity, which is the man is supposed to behave like a dog when it comes to sex and want it all the time. Boy, it is so layered. But what's great about all this, right? We carry all this stuff until we see it. Then when we see it, we can set ourselves free, and it can be self-defined. Wait a minute, what do I believe it means to be healthy and whole as a sexual being? And what would that look like in a partnership? That's what we get to ask ourselves. We get to set ourselves free once we finally label all the cultural judgments.
Mm-hmm. And that's the sovereignty piece right there. Mm-hmm. How do I step into my wholeness, my healthy sexuality, my, just being my essence, my truth, and then bring that into a relationship without feeling like I've fragmented myself. Mm-hmm. That's what I hear a lot from women. Like I have a course, Fix Your Marriage in 40 Days, that I did with my biz partner in the UK, Dimple. I met her at a marriage retreat. Anyway, we had this whole fun journey together. We've been married, both of us, for 25, almost 26 years. And as we were putting this course together and we were taking people through it, and we were kind of asking, okay, I sort of worked with the women and she sort of worked with the men at one point. And it was like, the women were like, okay, we don't know exactly how, because in marriage you're taught to be one. There's a lot of religious programming with that, and it's beautiful. But at the same time, like you're saying, there's this what's the word I'm looking for? There's this obligatory place that you can get into in the marriage, and entitlement over each other's bodies. Mm-hmm. And that's tricky. So they were asked, it came down to like, okay, how do I show up whole? How do I show up in my sovereignty? And as you're talking about, Cherie, into somebody who's not so much there, not that I'm better than him or whatever. But how, and the only answer that I had was, you just model it. And you set these beautiful boundaries for like, hey, I come first, and I own my body. I'm glad you are attracted to my body, but you are not entitled to my body.
I love that.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen that too, where women are it's just a hard boundary to define when you've gotten all of this cultural programming.
I actually will hear women say a lot of times, and what this indicates to me is that they've just let this cultural programming like affect them so long and so deeply. They'll say, I would be fine to never have sex again. And
that's so sad.
Fascinating.
That's sad, isn't it?
Because they don't realize that their sexuality is theirs. So until that pressure is removed completely, so they have the space to navigate and understand that, and really like understand their own body. How do I feel turned on? How do I feel? What do I actually want? What brings me pleasure? Until they're asking some of those questions in a space where there's no pressure at all for them to belong to somebody else, they will not be able to access that in themselves. And so many women don't even know that their sexuality is God's given gift to them. It's yours, right, not anybody else's.
I actually heard a really interesting thing from a teacher that I've been following for a while who lives in Egypt, and she's just a real conduit for the divine feminine, and things that come out of her mouth are exquisitely true. One thing she did say recently is that the more that you become in touch with the divine, God, however we want to define that, everyone has their own sacred knowing around that, but the closer you come to that oneness or unity, the more your sexuality emerges, which is interesting because the sexual energy is actually the energy of pure bliss and joy. And it's the closest thing we have right now on the earth to access. And people don't want to put those together. They don't want to they don't want to see ecstasy and divine union as sexuality. And it doesn't, and she's saying it's irrespective of whether you have a committed partner or a partner at all. This is something sourced in you. And like you're saying, your sexuality is yours. And the reason it's yours is because no one can climb into your body and give you those feelings. Exactly. Those are sourced from within your divine template.
I love that so much. And, I even go as far as to say, I think that whether you want to call it erotic energy or creativity energy, that spark, what did you say, ecstasy? That energy is not just found in our bodies either. It's everywhere. It's all throughout nature.
Yeah. It's called ecstatic union. There's a term. I don't know what.
I haven't heard of that before.
Ecstatic union. And you can have that with the divine, not necessarily a literal orgasm, I guess. Right. But you can have this bliss, this ecstatic connection that supersedes anything else, and it's happening within you. It's nothing happening outside of you. It's not anyone else triggering this for you.
And why does this matter so much in marriage? Because when we access this within ourselves, then all of a sudden it's so much easier to receive our husbands. We want to receive them. And we're not I found for myself in my own personal journey, my husband did have the higher drive, and I always was worried about being seen as a piece of meat or all these different things, right? Always worried that he wasn't actually valuing me for who I was. So once I started valuing myself for who I was and creating this within myself, it was I didn't even oh, maybe he is seeing me like meat sometimes. Maybe that's part of his human weakness. I'm not really sure, but that's for him to figure out. I know who I am. I value myself.
Yeah. That's so key right there. And, I'm 52, so I've had lots of conversations over the years with friends about the ways men and women behave around sexuality. and the beliefs attached to them. And, a lot of it has to do with your upbringing. A lot of it has to do with, early programming. But the cultural program right now is so intense. It's just like, it's right in our face. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend tell me that she has to do a meditation. Like her husband, like they almost have to like have an agreement before, because she can't just, for hormonal and other reasons, she has to tell him, like, give me the heads up and I'll go do a meditation. And she has to literally send love and cleansing energy and protection and everything before she could be intimate with him. And I was like, that's a really healthy boundary. Like it's taking the time. And so, like you said, just, being seen as, a piece of meat or being used or whatever, just like, the convenient person in the bed with the husband, that there's some conscious preparation that takes care of her. And then of course she has a more enjoyable experience anyway, because of doing that. Mm-hmm. So I thought do you ever recommend that? Give us some of your tips, Melisa.
What are some of my tips? I think that I really love Erotic Blueprint, which is not something I'm certified in, but I love like just dabbling in, and I've learned a little bit about that. And it's just this concept that as we open up to the idea that there are different people who are turned on by different things, and it's like your personality type. Like, it doesn't mean it's not good or bad or right or wrong. So some people are more turned on by direct touch. Some people are more turned on by energetics, like they need to do all the spiritual stuff in order to feel turned on. Some are more aroused by like, more of like a sensual, like soft feathers or, things like that they need that kind of touch in order to be aroused. Like there's so many different avenues that it can take for somebody to be turned on. And that's for a woman and a man. So, say your husband has a lower drive than you. Well, maybe it's just because you guys haven't given him any space, himself included, right, to explore what actually turns him on. Because stereotypically men are supposed to be turned on just by direct touch. Like a light bulb, right? Like a light switch. And that's not always the case. And then same for women, we're supposed to just be wet and ready, like anytime. And again, that's not always the case, and stereotypically, I think we sort of assume most women need to talk. They want to talk. They want to connect emotionally first before physically. Again, that's not always the case. But even owning that and saying, okay, if we're going to have sex, we need to talk and have like deep connection beforehand. Okay, great. It takes some digging and reflecting and actually giving yourself permission to get outside of the boxes that you've been in order to really sink into that space and really your intuition can lead you to those pieces as you listen, and it's listening not just with your head, right? Like we could go pick up a Cosmo, we could get a million different strategies from outside about maybe different ways that you could get turned on, but as we instead turn inward in this feminine piece, right, and sink into our own bodies, our bodies will guide us through our senses.
There's a lot with that energy of sinking in, leaning in, that some would say would be like masculine dependence in an unhealthy way, but it's not. It's like you're saying, it's leaning into yourself first and then leaning into him, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of feminist viewpoints around these things, and so it can get a little muddy. And like you said, just find your blueprint, find what makes you feel connected and alive, find the magic formula for you, so that you don't feel like you're compromising a part of yourself, and that you also feel like it's a process of joy, not duty or burden or what ifs.
Right, exactly. Yep. And then what's so beautiful about this is as we open up ourselves to receiving this kind of pleasure in this way, open ourselves up to receiving the goodness that's all around us, it affects every aspect of our lives. So my favorite thing is to help women who are in business, who are struggling around these areas or want to up level their experience of intimacy and femininity. And what's so cool is as they do these pieces, right, really allow themselves to sink in, to become embodied, to lead through their own feminine intuition, it has crazy results on their business. It's so fun.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's talk about the intuition part because, you know, I know one thing that I've learned really powerfully is that if a woman is to own her voice, and I'm talking about like actually using her words, her, you know, speaking out. Mm-hmm. And that's masculine, right? Speaking out.
Right. Mm-hmm.
She has to go in first and get into that energy center of her body. So the throat chakra is that energy center that is the midpoint between the heart and the head. And a lot of people, a lot of healers call it the highway of emotion. And so I like to first think about the heart. Of course, you have to be grounded on the earth. You have to be in your body. But you can't even use your voice without being in your body, which comes back to the first and second chakra and feelings of safety. The reason that a lot of women aren't using their voice is because the way I see it, at least from the energy psychology standpoint, is they don't feel safe or that they have a right to. And that's all first and second chakra, mostly first chakra root. They're not rooted. They're not grounded in who they are. The second thing is that they're not centered in the heart or listening to the heart, because what happens is the heart energetically sends messages up to the mind all of the time. There's more neural pathways that run from the heart to the head than the other way around. It's not just our brain sending signals. Our heart is constantly trying to speak to the mind, and that midpoint between the heart and the mind is the voice. It's actually your expression center. It's not just your speaking center, that area of your neck. A lot of thyroid issues here, a lot of things we could talk about. But the point being, in my Stand, Speak, Shine school, I talk about, you have to stand, you have to get rooted first, then you can speak, which helps you to illuminate those around you. And so it's an ordered process. And I know you do a lot with feminine intuition. Like the intuition piece is heart and mind, right? It's that's how the divine speaks to us, is to our hearts and minds. So how do you and I know you gave this to me in your notes that you can't be intuitive or have your intuition flowing or be in your intuitive gifts without the body. What are some things you've noticed and have helped some of your clients to do that?
Well, in my own personal journey, I struggled a lot with this concept. I was so disconnected from my body because of cultural conditioning that I worked on and in my mind and my spirit like crazy, to the point that, I, any therapy tools or self-help books I could get my hands on, I was always trying to fix myself, and I was working in and on my mind and my spirit. So then once I kind of exhausted a lot of self-help books and all that, I moved into this energy space and learned about what you're talking about here, energy psychology and the chakras, and discovered some of my spiritual gifts. And yet I still felt like something was missing for me. And it was my body. Our body is the sacred vessel. It's the only thing that merges our mind and our spirit and, makes the whole thing happen. Our body is also the channel that allows us to experience this life. So if we want to have a good, positive, joyful, full experience of this life, we're going to get that experience through our body. There is no other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and it's not, I guess we've been told it's kind of the vehicle of temptation or could lead us down the wrong track. So there's been a lot of fear-based, I guess, body rejection that a lot of people subtly carry or energetically carry that they're not aware of.
Yep.
How have you found are the best ways to release that body shame, to open up the space for that body to be the bridge between the mind and the spirit? Like how, I mean,
good question. There's a lot of
I don't know that it's the same for everybody. I'm just thinking like the only thing I can think, and I'm using the word think a lot instead of feel, but is just new programming. Just listen, find mentors who love their bodies, who are encouraging positive body messaging and who are being themselves. That seems first. And a lot of the messaging we got about our bodies came from men who don't have the lived experience of being feminine or having feminine energy in terms of like their anatomy and their physiology. So I say, listen to women who are like awakening to this and who understand how powerful sacred sexuality is and what it is. Because we don't necessarily receive that when we're younger, and maybe it's not appropriate even, as far as like lengthy conversations. Well, maybe it is. I don't know, but it depends on the setting.
Asking myself.
Yeah.
Because I know I don't want to raise my kids the way that I was raised, and navigating that is really tricky. But yeah, you know what? When it comes to the body, I run a training at least once a month. I touch on these pieces about our body, really being embodied in the feminine and also being fully blossomed in our sensuality. I love the word sensuality. I know it can be a trigger for some women because of all the cultural crap, but really, what is sensuality? It's being fully alive to your senses.
Exactly.
So, there's been so many pieces with my body. I mean, I healed from an eating disorder, and I went from having a totally shut down libido to like loving and embracing my own sexuality and sensuality and enjoying sex with my husband. And so there's so many pieces. I also used to hate sports and never ever called myself athletic. And, so went through that journey of finding what brings me joy to move my body, and it's yoga, and I love that, and hiking and some of these things. So I think all those pieces are important and like can't be pushed away. Our relationship with food, our relationship with exercise, all that stuff can't be pushed away, but we also can't keep approaching it the way that we are. It's nauseating, the diet trends and the, try this exercise plan to lose this weight. And oh my gosh, it's just, it's a mess. This is why we have to go back to our own truth and follow our desires.
Yeah, and I love that word desire because it is a very spiritual word. It precedes faith, and it's kind of the bridge between hope and faith. And the more I know, I follow Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, who I've interviewed on this podcast, who's a sex therapist, and she specializes in religious some of the damaging cultural religious programming. We had a lengthy discussion about it last year, but she does a desire workshop. And I know a lot of other facilitators do similar things. And it's just taking she told me it takes days to convince women that it's okay. That's it's just not just okay. It's extremely enlightened spirituality to foster desire within your being. And it's where your heart is, like the scriptures say, wherever your heart is, there's your treasure too. So if your heart is in alignment, then the desires that come through you can be working together for your betterment. Like you're saying, you know, you got into your body, you let those things work in you. You did the mental deprogramming that was needed for you to feel that aliveness, to feel that sensuality, and now you're bringing others to that, which is divine.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would love for you to read that excerpt from Revelations by Sarah Beek.
Yes, I'd love to. Can I want to say one more thing about this feminine intuition, if I can. So, you talked about the head and the heart and all of these pieces. And I used to really operate from that space. And I think opening those chakras is so important. But I actually really look at feminine intuition as moving from our womb. Oh my gosh, it makes me emotional thinking about it. And what I want to say to your listeners is this is where we go from getting all this masculine, feminine, and what should I do and all that out of our head and into our being, into our bones. You hear people say, like, well, what's your gut say about that, right? Well, where are our guts? Right there at our womb space. You talk about nerve innervation. Our guts are also talking to our brain all the time, right? So here's how you can tap into, this is why I call this feminine intuition instead of just calling it intuition. Because I really believe we have a voice in our womb. Like a voice is the only way I know how to say it, but a power, a wisdom that's deep in that space.
I call it the voices of the ancestresses. It all lives there. A lot of people call it the cauldron, the womb cauldron. And men, it's not that men can't access that energy center, of course, but it's something very specific to creation in the feminine that is a container for so much wisdom. Like you said, it's all in there. So I love that you brought that up, because we're not like, I come from a place, because I studied multiple braining, and it's all about how the energy centers hold very specific emotional processing or neurological processing centers in the body, which very much align with the chakras. But that's the physiology, right? That's emotion is just chemicals. But when it comes to like our DNA and the ancient lineages that we've come through and the things that our souls have seen and heard, who knows how many eons of time. I mean, it's all stored. And a lot of it, like you said, is stored there for women in that second area, the second chakra, womb area. So thank you for bringing that up. Love it.
You've heard me on here saying a lot, and that's actually something I've trained myself to do. That would be, if there's one big tool I would give to the listeners, it's that. Notice give yourself permission to start grunting again. That's my tool. But really notice what things make you want to go, or
they're just yummy to you.
Yep. And it's from that deeper voice too. It is that guttural place, and that's your truth. Like if I follow that every time I'm led, properly, that is where I've really sunk into trusting myself. So that deeper, when you say or you want to say
they come from the same space.
Isn't that cool?
That is cool. I think as I listen to some of my podcast episodes, I do this a lot.
Yep, there it is. That's the one.
I'm like, because it's so yummy. People say stuff. I'm like, oh, so that's interesting. Good to know. All right. So let's,
read this
Revelations is a beautiful book. I have interviewed the author, Sarah Beek, on my podcast right from the beginning when I was doing the Mary Magdalene series. Gosh, it would have been just almost 2 years ago, I guess. But this excerpt you sent over to me from this book is absolutely divine. So I'd love for you to read it.
And honestly, that's the reason I wanted to bring this in. It's because as we talk about, okay, cultural feminine versus energetic feminine, then really we go, then what is divine feminine? And it's not only feminine energy. It's not only that softness, as we've discussed. It's actually a beautiful dance between the two, where we move from that feminine intuition space. Flowing throughout. And I think that this excerpt from Revelations, and I've actually pieced together a few parts of this gives us a beautiful image of what it would look like to be that embodied divine feminine. Mm-hmm. My mother's presence beside my father. So my mother is a woman. Picture a woman as we read this. My mother's presence beside my father declared that there can be no true kingdom without a queendom, and the human body was the entrance to them both. My mother reclaimed the body and revered the planetary body as parts of her body. Under her loving hands, she reminded the body that it was the beloved. She raised the soul to the surface of the skin, realigned the bones with the being, and teased the tissues into their truth. She reopened a closed body to the wisdom and power of feeling. She taught pleasure as a path and gave pain a safe place to rest. She wept with those who needed tears and laughed uproariously with those who needed body jokes. She reminded women that the blood flowing out of them each cycle fed the earth and was one of the many signs that they were creatrixes who had the power to generate life. And when women stopped bleeding, they contained and increased their creative power and could steward it as they chose. Mm-hmm. My mother brought the divine feminine to earth and souls to the body by being herself. Organic sexuality is our original innocence, not our original sin. Close your eyes. Place one hand on your body and one hand on the earth. Feel. The erotic is a divine force, humming all around you and through you. It is life madly in love with itself. We must touch life.
Can I get an amen, sister, on that? Really beautiful, really beautifully put. She has and having met her and gotten to know her soul, she's very in touch with her feminine energy unapologetically. Well, this has been a wonderful journey with you, Melisa. Thank you. Thanks for reaching out to me. I'm going to give people where your website in the show notes and how to spell your name and everything. But do you want to just briefly tell people where they can find you on Facebook and where your website is?
Yeah, I primarily work with women who, as I mentioned, are navigating growing their business as well as, expanding their feminine and increasing and deepening their intimacy. And so I have a Facebook group called Women Manifesting Intimacy. And every week I run a training in there just to support these women in that space of growth in that way, keeping us grounded in the feminine when we're, kind of still playing a game in a masculine world business. So, definitely find me there, but you can also go and get a free intimacy guide on my website at www.melisakeenan.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, Melisa.
Thank you so much, Cherie. I've just enjoyed this so much.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope this week we can all come into ourselves, tune in to turn on, which means sinking in, leaning in, receiving, opening. That ecstatic union within, it's accessed within ourselves and not dependent on external forces, but just being able to source that creativity and funnel that aliveness within our own being. And also remember to just join our conversations always in the Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group, asking to join that, where we'll continue to explore and expand upon these deeper issues of embodiment. Thanks for listening again. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time on Women Seeking Wholeness.